Hello again, and welcome back to Educator.com's Advanced PHP with MySQL course. In today's lesson, we're going to be learning how to create databases and tables. We're going to learn about the specifically creating a database using what's called the create database command. And as we learned in a previous lesson, the MySQL server, the way it's set up is it contains a number of different databases, each of which can contain a number of different tables. So we're going to learn how to actually create a database for our store web application. We're going to learn about the create table command, which, as the name implies, allows you to create a table within a particular database on the MySQL server. We're going to learn about a little more detail about SQL data types, which are data types for the columns in a table that we'll be creating. As we learned before, in relational databases, data is organized in rows and columns, and for each particular column you can have data values, and they must correspond to a particular data type. We're going to talk about something called column attributes, which basically, in addition to providing a data type for a particular column in a table that we're creating, we can also specify some particular features of that column. We're going to learn how to create the command used to create the items table in our database, which we're going to be using for our web store application to hold all the information about the items in our store. We're going to go over a couple useful commands that can help you to find out about the structure of your database and the structure of tables that you've created. And then we're going to go over another required homework that you're going to need to do to basically to set up this items table so that we can connect to it from our web application. So basically, a database is created in MySQL or in SQL using the create database SQL command. It simply is create database followed by the name of the database that you want to create as a parameter. It's a very simple command. And then MySQL also provides a couple of non-SQL commands that allow you to basically provide some information about the MySQL server. When you log into the MySQL server, you can type, for example, show databases, and that's going to list all of the databases that currently exist on that MySQL server that your user has access to. And that's a sort of a privileged thing. Now, we're going to be connecting in this course and in this lesson and all of the other lessons as the PHP user, which is the account we created in the last lesson. And because they have all privileges, we're going to be able to see all the tables. We're going to be able to see all the databases within the particular MySQL server we're connecting to. There's also the use command that you can issue that basically says, you type that in at the MySQL command prompt that says use, and you specify the name of a particular database that you want to use. Basically what that does is that tells the MySQL monitor that any future commands you issue are basically going to be issued on that particular database. For example, if you're inserting data into a database, you won't actually have to specify the name of the as we'll learn, and when we learn about insert statements, you won't have to specify both the name of the database and the table you want to insert data to. You'll just be able to specify the name of the table because use is already going to let MySQL know you're using a particular database. So what we're going to do is actually create our database that we're going to use for our web application, our web store. We're going to call the database is going to be called advanced _PHP. And so what I'm going to do is bring up start the MySQL Monitor program, which we learned about. And the way you do that again is by loading the Windows or opening the Windows command prompt, and then using the cd command to change to the directory where that mysql.exe file is located, which is the MySQL Monitor client program. And then we're going to connect as this PHP user PHP user account we've created. So we type MySQL. We don't need to specify the host name because we're going to default to the local host. We're going to be connecting to the MySQL server on the local host. We're going to be logging in as user PHP user, and we're going to ask it to request us to prompt us for a password. So I'm going to go ahead and enter the password that we had set up last time. For this course, this example, we'd set up as educator as the password. So now we can see that we've got our MySQL prompt and shows that we've been able to successfully log in. So the first thing I'm going to do is run that show databases command that I told you about. And what that's going to do is basically list all of the different databases that are available in the MySQL or on this current MySQL server. We can see there's actually a number of different databases, even though we haven't actually created anything. The XAMPP first of all, the MySQL database itself comes with its own tables, or own databases already built. For example, the MySQL database, and then XAMPP does some other things to set up some other databases. For example, some example databases. There's a test database and so forth. So those are the databases that are currently on the server. Now we're going to create our advanced PHP database. We type create database, the name that we want to give to it, which is advanced.php, followed by a semicolon, and hit enter. It's going to say query OK, let us know that the command was successfully run. And then one thing you can do actually is you can use the up and down arrow keys when you're on the MySQL prompt, and it's going to let you scroll through previously entered commands, which can save you some typing. So because we typed show database as our last command, if I hit the up arrow once, it's going to go ahead and populate the command prompt with show databases. So now when I enter it, oops, it looks like I made a typo. Typed a 3 by accident. Show databases. We can see all of the databases that we had before, but now we also can see our advanced PHP database. So now any of the future commands that we're going to be using, we want to operate on this advanced PHP database. So we're going to type use advanced PHP, and that's going to allow us basically tell this monitor client that we're going to be using this database, because in a second we're going to be creating a table in this particular database. So it's just going to let you know that the database has changed. You're currently using advanced PHP. So SQL has a command called the create table command, which is what allows you to create database tables. Basically what it does is it takes a comma delimited list of basically column definitions. Basically you define the columns that you want in your particular table. So basically the command is create table, those are the keywords, and then you follow it by the name that you want to give the table. For example, you might call it users, or for what we're going to be using in this lesson, we're going to be creating a table called items to store items information. And then you have this comma delimited list of however many columns you want to create, and basically what you do is you list the name of the column you want to create, you provide the data type of the column, and then you can provide some additional attributes that we're going to talk about to basically just further define how that column is going to work in the database. And you separate all the different column definitions by commas. So data types, we talked about that a little in our introduction database lesson, that SQL provides some data types for data that you store in relational database tables. We're going to specifically talk about some of the specific data types now. There's a couple of numeric data types that we're going to be using. First of all, int is a data type that represents an integer, just like the int data type in PHP. And what you can do is you can specify int, which will allow you to do positive and negative integers. You can also specify as a data type int space unsigned, and that's basically saying you want an unsigned integer, which means it's an integer that only holds positive values. We're actually going to be using that for our item IDs and all of our ID columns in all of our tables. You can also specify a floating point number using this decimal data type. And what you do is you specify the keyword decimal, followed by parentheses, and then followed by 2 digits, and one we're going to call M, comma, and then the other one D. Basically what M does is it specifies the maximum number of digits that this floating point number can represent, and then D is going to represent the number of digits after the decimal point. So for example, if we create a column, let's say we create a column, which is what we're going to be doing, called price, and so we have the name of the column, the data type, and then we specify that we want it to be maximum of 3 digits with 2 after the decimal place, which means it can basically only hold numbers of the form x.yz, where it has 3 total digits, 2 of which come after the decimal point. We're going to be using that to hold the price of our items in our store. Then there's a couple of string data types that we're going to be using. The first one is called a char, and it's followed by parentheses with an M parameter, and basically M is a number that allows you to specify a char data type. Basically, a char data type allows you to, it basically says you're creating a fixed length string. So basically, if you give this data type to a particular column and you say char 3, what you're basically saying is that this column that you're defining, that you're using this data type for, is going to be a string that's of a fixed length, and it's going to be of 3 characters long. An alternative to that is varchar, and what that is it's a variable length string that can be up to the number m characters in length that you specify. So you could say varchar 10, which means that this column in this particular table that has this data type can hold a string of variable length up to 10 characters. There's also the text data type, which is basically a data type that allows you to store large amounts of string data. And we're going to be using this, for example, for our product description. You might have a product description maybe that's a couple paragraphs long. Well, instead of specifying a varchar or a varchar to basically say that this is going to be a variable length string up to so many digits, you can use something like text, which has a predefined limit to it, but it's very large, and that's basically, again, for storing large amounts of string data. So as mentioned in our create table SQL command, we specify the name of the column, the data type. We just went over the data type, and there's also some additional attributes you can specify for a particular column. For example, you can specify the attribute called primary key, and basically what that does is when you specify that in a column's definition, it denotes that that column is the primary key of the table. And when you do this, only one thing to note is that if you're defining multiple columns in your table, only one column can actually have this primary key attribute specified. The other another attribute that you can use, which we're going to be using, is called auto_increment. And basically what that does is that it can be used for apply to integer and floating type or floating point columns, so basically numeric type columns. And basically what it does is when you specify that column as auto-increment, what PHP will do is when you insert a new item, a new row into a table, for whatever column you have specified auto-increment, it's going to look at the largest value, integer or numeric value that's in the table for that particular column, and it's just going to increment it by 1, and it's going to generate that as the new number for that particular column for that particular row. So for example, if we have, let's say we have an item in the store, 1001, say this is our kind of tabular format, called item 1, maybe it's $15. Well, with auto increment, when you add a new item to the table, it's going to go ahead and look at the largest item, well, assuming this was the auto increment column, so it has this auto increment specifier specified in the table create table command. So this is an auto increment column. When we add a new item to this table, it's going to go ahead and look and see, okay, 1001 was the last item added to the table. When we insert this new item, maybe we'll specify it's called item 2, that's $25. We're just going to increment this by 1, and now it's going to be given the ID, or the item ID 1002. So now what we're going to be doing is going over the command that we're going to use to create our, we're going to sort of put this create table command into action, and we're going to use it to create our a table called items in our database, which we're going to use to hold the items in our particular store. It's going to contain 5 columns in the table. So you can see here we have 5 column definitions in this create table statement. And I forgot to mention that actually after you write create table in the command and then the name of the table, you have a set of parentheses in which you enclose all of the different column definitions. So we have 5 different columns we're creating. The first one we're going to call item ID, which is going to represent the item ID of our column. We're going to have it be an unsigned integer. That's going to be the data type. We're going to have it be auto-incremented, so that means every time we add an item to our database, it's just going to automatically increment that ID, so it's going to generate it on our own automatically for us. And then we're going to note that that's going to be the primary key column of this table. Because we want item IDs are going to be something that's unique. You can't have items in our store with with the same item ID, because then you wouldn't have a way of identifying them. So we're going to use this column as our primary key, which again, a primary key column is a column in which you can only have one row in the table that has a particular value. You can't have multiple rows with the same value. So in this case, we're not going to be able to have multiple rows in the table with the same item ID. We're going to create, the next column we're going to create is something called name. We're going to give it the data type varchar, so it's going to be a variable length string, and we're going to allow it to be up to 25 characters in length. We're going to create a price column, and we're going to let it be a floating point number that can be 7 digits long, and it's going to have 2 digits after the decimal place. So we can have a number that looks like this, with 5 digits before the decimal point and 2 digits after. We're going to use that to hold our price. We're going to have a description column, and we're going to set its data type equal to text, and that's going to allow us to store a large amount of text information about the description for our item. And then we're going to create an image file extension column, and we're going to use the fixed length string data type called char, and we're going to say make it a fixed length of length 3. So that means that we can only enter basically image file extensions that have length 3, which makes sense because we'll be entering things like JPEG, GIF, and PNG, for example, which are file extensions that are 3 characters in length. One thing to note is that when you create this table using the create table command, the order in which you list these columns in your definition, or the order in which you list these column definitions within the create table command is the order in which they're going to be created in the table. So, for example, the structure of our table is going to look like this. We'll have a table called items, and it's going to have a number of different columns, and essentially they're going to have an automatic order to them, and the order is going to be this, basically the way we specified them. And this is going to become important when we start inserting data into our database, because there's a shortcut that you can sort of do for inserting data where you can just specify the values for all the different columns without saying I want this to be the item ID, this to be the name. And so the order that you put them in is going to be dependent on this order in which the columns are defined within the table. So before we go ahead and create that items table, what we're going to actually do is I'm going to tell you about 2 other sort of useful commands. One is called show tables, which after you've selected a database using the use command in a MySQL monitor, you can type show tables, and what that's going to do is it's going to allow you to list all of the tables that currently exist in our particular database. So if we go back to our MySQL monitor, we're using the advanced PHP database that we just created, so it shouldn't have any tables in it. So when we type show tables, it's going to say empty set, meaning that there's no tables. There's also a describe statement that we're going to go over after we create our items table that allows you to see the structure of a particular table. You basically type describe and then the name of the table that you want to see the structure of, and we'll be running that on items. So let's go ahead and create that items table using the create table statement. So we're going to say create table create a table called items. We're going to have open parentheses. Our first column is going to be called item ID. It's going to be an unsigned integer. That's going to be the data type. It's going to have the attributes auto increment and primary key. One thing I forgot to mention is that when you specify the attributes, you simply separate them by spaces. So we're going to say item ID is an unsigned integer that's going to be auto incremented, and this is going to be the primary key column of the table. We're going to enter a comma, which is going to say we're done with this column definition. Let's create the next column, which is going to be name, which we decided was going to be a variable length string of 20 maximum characters, 25 characters. Again, we enter a comma to separate to start a new column definition. We're going to have price, which is going to be a decimal number that can be 7 digits long with 2 digits after the decimal place. We're going to have a description column, which is going to be of the text data type, which is going to allow us to store a large amount of string data. And then we're going to create the image file extension, image file ext column, and we're going to have that be a fixed length string of length 3. And then what we do is we finish all this by having a closing parentheses and then a semicolon to go ahead and issue the command. And when we hit enter, it's going to let us know that the query was, assuming it was typed correctly, the query was okay, which means that the command ran successfully and the table should be created. So now, when we type show tables, we should see that this table items has been created. And sure enough, it says tables in the advanced.php database. There's a table called items. Now if we want to make sure that the structure of the table that we just created is how we want it to be, we can write describe items, followed by a semicolon, and we can see it outputs a table that has information about that table items. We can see that it contains an item ID with an integer, unsigned integer as a data type. It's a primary key, and it has this extra attribute called auto increment. There's a bunch of other information here that we're not really going to get into, but it does provide other information about the table. It has a name column that can be 25 characters in length, has a price column, a description column, and an image file extension column. And the thing to note is the order is that this table is ordered has five columns, and they're in the order item ID, name, price, description, and image file extension. So we have another required homework for this lesson, and that's because it's going to help you to set up this items database that we're going to be using for our web application. So basically what I want you to do is log in to the localhost MySQL server as PHP user, and do that at the Windows command prompt using the MySQL Monitor program. I want you to type the show databases command to see a list of all the current databases that are on the server, to see that we don't have this advanced PHP database yet. Then go ahead and run the create database command that's going to create our advanced PHP database. Then when you rerun show databases, you should now see, you should run that to confirm that advanced PHP database has been added to this particular MySQL server. You're going to select that new database for use, so when we create a table, it's going to create a table in that advanced PHP database. So we're going to do the use command. So we're going to say use advanced PHP. Run the show tables command to get a little practice with that, to showing you that there's no tables in this brand new database that we created, which makes sense because we haven't added any yet. And then create an items table using the create table command that we used in the lecture that specifies the item ID column, the name, the price, the description, the image file extension. And you can look at the slides that we've gone over to see the syntax to do that, so that you create the table exactly as we're going to be using it in our web application. After you do that, you should get a query OK message from MySQL letting you know that the command ran all right. And then you can go ahead and issue show tables again and verify that now you have an items table in that advanced PHP database. And then run the describe command specifying items as the table you want to describe, and verify that all that information you entered in our create table command was successfully the table was successfully created with those attributes. It has those particular columns with those particular data types and any particular column attributes we specified. And assuming all those commands worked, it should see the same output that we saw in the lecture today. So that ends today's lesson. Thank you for watching Educator.com, and look forward to seeing you next time.